How strong a role is New Zealand playing in the Beyond Oil coalition?
New Zealand is an associate member of the Beyond Oil and Gas Coalition, the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance. We have been an active member since the scoping process in 2020. It was great to have Minister Shaw and Kay Harrison, our ambassador, as part of that scoping group. I wasn't in the room in the formal scoping process, but from what I heard before they joined the scoping group, they provide a good critical focus on delivering on 1.5, which we need. However, New Zealand can't currently become a full member of the Alliance because we still allow new exploration onshore in Taranaki. In order to become a full member, we need to end all new exploration. Any new exploration is searching up more unburnable carbon, more oil and gas that can't be burned to meet the Paris Agreement goals.
Oil Change International has another big report due out on Wednesday. To what extent can you give us a little flavour of that without preempting what you're going to say on Wednesday?
On Wednesday, we're releasing a new briefing called Investing in Disaster. We've broken down the final investment decisions, so the key moments where a binary decision is made to proceed with a new oil and gas project or not, that have taken place this year and are forecast to take place between 2023 and 2025. We've analysed that by country, by company, and by project, providing a watch list of the biggest projects that are up for a proposal in 2023. Because no final decision has been made on these, they can still be stopped. If they're not stopped, it will deliver huge volumes of new carbon pollution into the atmosphere and further jeopardise the Paris Agreement goals. We've quantified how much this new production would be in proportion to our remaining carbon budget for 1.5, and how many coal plants it would be equivalent to, how many years of global energy sector emissions it would be equivalent to. But I'll have to wait till Wednesday to say that.
Does New Zealand get even just a footnote in the report?
No, New Zealand fortunately is not on the dirty list because we have banned new exploration and have very little new extraction coming online. So we luckily aren't one of the big expanders. There are two different arcs that will be happening around fossil fuels this week in parallel. There are the commitments that are happening outside of the formal negotiations, and we're hoping for a good news story there. Tomorrow there's an event on the Glasgow Statement on International Public Finance, where we're hoping that new countries will have signed on. Then on Wednesday there is an event with the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, of which New Zealand's an associate member. And again, we're hoping to see the ambition that began in Glasgow growing. So outside the negotiations, we're hoping to see a narrative of expansion and ambition and positivity. Inside the negotiations, it's a little bit less clear. Normally, going into this stage of the negotiation, there'd be a small number of unresolved issues being passed to the ministerial level. There are something like 17 unresolved issues being passed to the ministerial level now, and we don't have even a draft from the presidency of what the front page, the cover text, could look like. We know that India has proposed language around the phase down of fossil fuels, which is a step forward from what was agreed in Glasgow, which was phase down of coal. On the other hand, the European Union has spoken in favour of a phase out of coal. We argue that the science demands a phase out of all fossil fuels. Burning any new oil and gas beyond what's already committed as at 2022 is taking us far beyond the Paris Agreement goals.
What's the progress, do you reckon, on the non-proliferation treaty idea behind fossil fuels? How much momentum is there?
The Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is gaining momentum. Vanuatu, of course, endorsed the call for a treaty at the UN General Assembly. Tuvalu has now brought that call into the UNFCCC space. So the momentum is growing, particularly amongst our Pacific neighbours. And New Zealand, of course, Minister Shaw has expressed in principle support for the idea, but New Zealand's government has not formally endorsed it. It would be great to see New Zealand formally endorsing it, but before we can do that, of course, we need to stop proliferating new fossil fuels within our own exclusive economic zone.
Yeah. For people back home in Aotearoa, as they still need to go to petrol pumps, what's the best choice they can make between Z, BP and Mobil? Is there any difference between the three of them in terms of how each of them are responding to climate? And therefore, if you have to buy fossil fuels, I'm not taking this as a recommendation on your part, I'm just trying to understand where those three companies stand in a global context.
Z, of course, is a separate New Zealand company, though I believe it's recently been bought out by an Australian group.
Yep.
The previous leadership of Z focused heavily on climate, with Mike Bennett's role in the Climate Leaders Coalition in particular. However, I know that the Lawyers for Climate Action New Zealand Inc. has challenged Z for greenwashing. So Z's true environmental position is questionable. What's not questionable is the position of the international oil majors like ExxonMobil and BP. We, in our Bigger Reality Check series of reports, have assessed their climate pledges and plans and found them both to be grossly insufficient. BP wants us to think they are moving beyond petroleum, but the reality is they're not. They've announced that they will decrease their production by 2030, which sounds good, though it's not a decrease in line with what's needed for the Paris Agreement. But when you look more closely, they're not doing this by closing fields and mines. They're doing this by selling their most polluting, least profitable production assets to other companies. Following best practice corporate emissions accounting, when they sell those assets, they should be recalculating their baseline so that it's not counted as a reduction just when ownership changes. They're not doing that.
Yeah.
So they're claiming reductions that don't really exist.
And of course, Mobil in New Zealand is part of ExxonMobil.
Yes.
And ExxonMobil is certainly well up the list of the most egregious of the fossil fuel players.
From memory, ExxonMobil was one of the companies that we rated as grossly insufficient on all 10 of our criteria. We try not to debate a ranking between them because the difference between even the best of the oil majors and what's needed for the Paris Agreement is bigger than the difference between the best and the worst. But ExxonMobil is amongst the very worst. On the agenda at this COP is the creation of a finance facility to help pay for the impacts of loss and damage. So loss and damage is when adaptation fails. It's climate disaster hurting people and communities. And New Zealand has expressed support for principles for a facility, but not expressed support at this COP for the creation of a facility per se, which is what developing countries are calling for. In particular, President of Barbados, Mia Mottley, called for this finance facility to be funded by taking revenue from the fossil fuel companies, the polluters that are causing this crisis. This reflects the international law principle of polluter pays and provides a credible mechanism by which we could generate new additional revenue streams to address loss and damage, rather than, as New Zealand did last week, redirecting existing adaptation funding to loss and damage. Carbon Brief calculated that taxing the extraordinary revenues of the oil and gas sector this year could generate $49 billion US for such a facility.
That's just taxing the windfall profits this year.
Taxing the total profits.
The total profits, yeah.
Mia Mottley was very careful in the call for this. Tax has been very careful not to call for it to just be on the windfall profits, though those profits are particularly extreme this year. What is called for on the agenda is a facility for loss and damage that will be durable even when the oil market is in the bust part of its unstable boom and bust cycle.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your comments, and I look forward to staying in touch through the week as these gripping issues progress.
Indeed,
so thank you.
And you.
Thank you.
Thanks.